Hi, welcome to The Blind Homemaker. Today we are making homemade lasagna from scratch with homemade noodles that I'm going to ground my own flour to make. My family loves lasagna. It's delicious, it's easy, especially if you have a frozen lasagna in the freezer. It's really one of our go tos. But what I was noticing is I just really don't feel great after eating it. It's really easy to overeat, and then you just feel like you have a brick in your stomach, really. It's just very heavy. So I was determined to find a recipe for lasagna that was delicious, but also made me feel good after I ate it. And this is really it. And I think the main thing is making my own pasta from fresh ground flour. I think my body just accepts it more. It's a lot more hearty, so you feel satiated with a smaller serving. So, this is how I did it. I am starting by grinding some fresh flour. I'm going to use soft white wheat. Traditionally, for pasta making, you would use durum wheat, but I don't have that, so that's not what I'm going to be using. So, I'm going to grind my flour, and I'm going to need 3 cups for this recipe. So what I'm doing to make the pasta is adding the flour to a bowl. Then I'm going to make a well in the middle. So pretty much what that means is just make a little divot in the center and just push the flour up on the sides of the bowl. And to that middle part into the well, I'm going to add 4 eggs, a sprinkle of salt, and some oil. I'm using avocado oil, but olive oil would be good too. Now, to bring the dough together, I am just going to bring some of the flour from the sides down into the middle of the well, and I'm going to do that in a circular motion around the outside of the bowl until I get the dough completely combined. This does take a little bit of time. It is a little bit messy. My hands are clean, and I just get in there with my hands. That's the easiest way to do it. Some people use a wooden spoon, but I don't, and that's totally fine. Do what works for you. It's your kitchen. And once I get the dough all combined, what I'm going to do is plop the dough out on my counter. Now, I did forget to oil mine, so don't forget to do that. Either put a little bit of oil on your counter or use a little bit of flour. And now I'm just going to knead the ball of dough just for a couple of minutes. I want to make sure that the texture is completely smooth all the way through. You may need to add a little sprinkle of water or a tiny bit of oil. Fresh ground flour does take a minute to absorb moisture, so just keep that in mind. And once the dough comes all together, I am just going to stick it in a Ziploc bag and pop it into the refrigerator for about an hour while I work on the other parts of the recipe. The dough just needs to rest before you can roll it out. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm going to brown my meat. I'm using 1 pound of grass-fed ground beef and then 1 pound of Italian sausage. And I'm bringing this all together in my cast iron Dutch oven. So I'm just putting the raw meat in there and then breaking it up with a spoon and just crushing it essentially to break up the meat. I have my heat on about medium high. And the key, I feel like, to meat is just flipping it and using your spoon to break the meat up. There's really not a lot of technique to it, honestly. You will be able to smell the change and be able to tell when the meat is done basically by the smell. That's how I do it often. You can have a sighted person just kind of stand by you for the first couple of times and let you know when the meat is done, just so you know what that smell does smell like, so you can recognize it later. You can also pull a little bit of the meat out, let it cool, and then feel the texture. It should not feel mushy at all. It should feel firm all the way through. I am not adding any seasonings or anything to this meat, just letting it cook through. And once that is finished, I am just going to add a jar of Rayo's. I actually use 2 jars of the Rayo's pasta sauce. It is my favorite. It is so delicious. It doesn't use any sugar. So if I'm not making a sauce from scratch, that is what I use. And I'm just going to let that sauce simmer for a bit. And while that is simmering, I'm going to grate some cheese. I like to grate my own cheese, especially in a casserole or anything where the cheese is going to melt. It just has much better texture and meltiness. Yes, that's a word. If you grate it yourself, because it doesn't have that like starchy, sawdusty stuff on the outside of it. So I am grating some mozzarella and some Parmesan. Lots of people, when they make lasagna, they like to add ricotta cheese or cottage cheese, and my family just does not prefer that. So what I'm going to do is make a cheese sauce. So in a pot, I'm going to start by making a roux. And I feel like making a roux is very important for everyone to learn how to do. So what I'm going to do is add a 1/2 cup of butter, and I'm going to let that completely melt. And I saved a little bit of my flour that I ground earlier. So I am going to add equal parts, so 1/2 cup of that flour. Now, this may seem crazy, but how I have learned how to make a roux is the smell. This is what you're going to call a blonde roux. So you're just essentially cooking out the flour taste, but you are not browning the flour really at all. We are using this more as a thickening agent. So what is very important when making a roux is stirring constantly, because it can burn and it can stick very easily. So as you start stirring, you will notice that your roux just smells like butter. And as you stir and stir and stir, it takes several minutes, but as you stir and stir, you will start to smell a nutty, more floury smell. And once you start smelling that nutty, almost like bread baking, you'll smell kind of like this bready smell. That's when you know your blonde roux is ready to go. Now, maybe I'll make a video about gumbo where I can teach you how to make a chocolate roux. That did take some practice, but it didn't take a very long time to get to that point where my roux was ready to go. It took maybe about 6 or 7 minutes. So I'm just stirring constantly, smelling. And then once I get to the point where I smell that nutty wheat type flavor, I am going to add milk, and I'm adding roughly 2 to 3 cups of milk. I did not measure this. I kind of just measured with my heart. And once the milk goes in, I'm going to stir. You cannot walk away from this. So make sure that your children are settled. Your pets aren't going to bother you, because this is going to take your full undivided attention. So the heat, I just turned it down to about a medium low, and I'm just going to stir the bejesus out of this. I want to make sure that there are no clumps in my sauce. So I'm just stirring. And what will happen is your milk will thicken. So what I'm doing is I'm scooping up some of the milk on my spoon, and I'm letting it drip back into the pot. And you can tell by the sound that the mixture makes going back into the pot how thick it is, and how long after it drops off of the spoon until you hear it drop into the pot, you can tell how thick that is. You can also take the spoon and let it cool for a second and run your finger across the back of the spoon to feel how thick it is. For me, I don't like to do that for this recipe quite so much, just because you can overdo it while you're waiting for the mixture to cool a little bit on the back of the spoon. So I just listen closely to how long it takes the mixture to drop back into the pot. And once it thickens to kind of like a yogurt consistency, not a Greek yogurt, but a more thin yogurty consistency, I am actually going to turn off the heat. This is very important. And I'm going to add my cheese. I'm adding a big handful of Parmesan and a big handful of mozzarella. And then I'm also going to add some salt and some garlic powder. And I'm going to stir, 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 stir until the cheese has fully melted and combined. It does take a little bit of time. So stir, 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 stir. And once it all comes together, I'm just going to cover that while I roll out my pasta, just because all of these things need to be relatively easy to handle when I start layering everything together. Meanwhile, my sauce is still simmering a little bit. During this whole process, I am actually going to turn that heat off now as well, just so I can handle that mixture when it comes time. This is the fun part. I'm excited for this one. I have grabbed my dough out of the refrigerator and it is time to roll out our pasta. So I am just going to take my dough ball and use my bench scraper to cut the dough into more manageable pieces. I don't want to roll out a huge sheet of just this one dough ball. So I'm going to work with smaller amounts of dough at a time. Now, once I have my little area that I'm going to work with, my counter is clean and I have oiled it just so nothing sticks. I am going to take that little piece of dough and I am going to roll it out with my rolling pin into an even sheet. This takes a little bit of practice. I use one hand to roll and the other hand to feel how my sheet is looking. I do try to have it in as even of a sheet and in a rectangular-ish piece. Now, we're just doing the best we can. So if it's not completely rectangular, that's totally fine too. So I'm just rolling that as well as I can. I currently do not have a pasta maker. It is on the wish list, but you really don't need one for lasagna noodles. I am just going to roll this out by hand with my rolling pin, and I'm going to use a pizza cutter to cut my strips. So once my sheet is ready to go, I am going to roll everything out perfectly and grab my pizza cutter. I'm going to hold my pizza cutter in my right hand and I am going to cut horizontally and I'm going to work from the bottom up. So in my right hand, I have the pizza cutter. My left hand, I'm going to measure my strip and I am going to use my left hand to make sure that I am cutting in a straight line, and I am going to use my right hand to cut the strip. Then I'm going to grab my bench scraper and use that to help pull the strip up off of the counter, and then I'm just going to lay it across my bar until I have gotten all of my strips together. It is going to dry out a little bit, which is fine, but I'm mostly setting it like this because I don't want the pieces sticking together. So once I have all of those strips cut out, I am going to take my next piece of dough, roll it out, and cut those strips. And I'm just going to repeat the process until I have used all of my dough. The moment we have all been waiting for, we are going to assemble the lasagna. So I have a foil pan. I really enjoy using the foil pans. Maybe they're not the best for you. It's fine. This is my kitchen. This is what I want to do. And if I had it to do again, I would have actually split this up into two separate pans and popped one in the freezer because, darling, this foil pan was begging for her life. She was full, full, full. So the first layer, I am going to add the sauce, then noodles, then our cheese sauce, then shredded cheese, then the sauce again, and just layer all the way up into the top. And I like to end off with the red sauce, like the meat sauce, then put a layer of cheese. There is no way to get around this. This is going to be messy. My hands are clean And that's pretty much what I use to be able to make sure that I am fully spreading everything out evenly on each layer. So I will use my hands. They are clean. Please do not freak out. And my family does not mind. So I am just layering, and I'm using my left hand as I'm layering with my right hand to just make sure I'm not missing any spots, making sure that I am layering my pasta. I am laying these strips horizontally, and I do have to say, for the most part, I managed to make the strips just as long as they needed to be for the foil pan. So I was very proud of that. I had a couple of strips that were a little bit long. So just what I did is pinched off the ends and used those ends to cover any open spaces. And this was always my favorite part, is layering. It's a fun task to do, and it's a little bit mindless. So it's almost therapeutic, if you ask me. So I'm just layering all of that in my pan, and I did use pretty much all of the ingredients. So I'm glad I didn't have any one random thing left over. Now, when I go to put this in the oven, I tried to lift up the foil pan, but it started bowing. So I did get a cookie sheet, and I set my foil pan on top of the cookie sheet to pop in the oven. And I am going to cook this covered for about 30 minutes. And I am going to pull the foil off and let the cheese brown for another 10-ish minutes. You can also put that sucker on broil if you want to. For me, I get distracted a little too easily, so I prefer to just take the foil off and let it continue to cook. And I am cooking this on, I believe it was 350, 375, depending on the heat of your oven. Now, meanwhile, my kitchen is a mess. So while this cooks, I'm going to clean up my kitchen. So that's how it's done. Thank y'all so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed the video, and I hope it inspired you to try a new recipe at home. Cooking does not have to be complicated, and the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work out, but you usually find out something is edible in the process. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned to see what the lasagna looks like when it comes out of the oven. Also, please subscribe and like the video, because it really helps me out. It helps other people find my videos as well. And it's completely free to subscribe. So if you could do that, that would be great. And until next time, happy homemaking.